So, um, dad's from Roscommon. Your mom's folks are from Fermanagh. Do you know where in Fermanagh they're from?
Yeah, Ederney. I've been there. I've been. I've seen the family farm.
Hold on,
My
say that
my
again. Where?
Ederney, Ederny, or maybe EY, right near
Where?
Loch Earn.
All right. Okay, so
Yeah,
not far from Enniskillen.
no, not far at all. Close.
Right. So yeah, so basically not far from the border because I grew up 4 miles from the border on the other side of the border. So you have fond memories of going back to Ireland during the summer when you were a
Oh my
kid?
God, yeah. I was there first when I was 5 years old. Saw the family. We're very close with the family that's still there. First there when I was 5, met my grandfather for the one and only time. My father's father, who never left the homestead, that we were at in Roscommon near Loughlin for, Shaun, for like 1,000 years. I asked my aunt, how long were we on this land? And she said, what do you mean? Forever. Like we were on that land. It was a couple of acres. We weren't allowed to own larger parcels of land. So the farm was small. My father grew up there at the house, the oldest of 5 kids. His father, my grandpa Dominic, grew up in the house. He's one of 10 kids. And he helped as a teenager build the house. They weren't in a house before that. They were in a shed. No water, no electricity. Of course, just the basics. And so yeah, I was back there early. Then I went a couple of times when I was in my early 20s before I got married. And then I got married to my wife, 5 kids, and just started living my life. Just never got back until years later. And now over the last like 8 years, I've been there a whole bunch of times. We go often. My wife and I were back there just this year, and now we'll go out to the West Coast. We'll go to Ashford Castle, then we'll go up to Ballahadreen, stay above a pub at Durkin's because my family is still there. Cousins, first cousins, second cousins, cousins once removed, all still there. People that I knew there in the when I was a little kid, my great aunts, and their children, all there. And I have an aunt in Dublin, so we're back a lot and love going back. I'd go back more often if I could.
Now, I'd say going there as a 5-year-old must have been quite a culture shock because, I mean, we're talking about what, 60s?
Yeah, late 60s. Yeah, 1969.
So I mean, it wasn't uncommon for rural houses back then. It was outdoor plumbing and, you know, electricity. I mean, I know, and I grew up there, but I would spend when I was that 5, 7, those years, I would go to Galway to stay with friends. And I would have to share the bed with the grandfather, and I was scared out of my life that the guy was going to die in the middle of the night, and but no bathroom, and you get up in the morning and you say, "Would you like cornflakes?" And the milk was coming straight from the cow,
Right.
lumps and all. I was like, "Yeah, no, that was kind of a culture shock." So obviously you grew up in a house where you were very aware of being Irish.
Oh yeah, Shaun, only later in life did I realize just how hardcore we were because it was normal
Right.
there. Like we were right. There was Irish things all around the house. The Irish music was playing. People would come over my house and they go, "Oh my God, what is your father speaking like? What's with the accent?" I go, "What accent?" And I realized there's a thick brogue because everybody had a brogue that we knew. It was again Long Island, Irish, Italian, Jewish, but our circles, and certainly I saw my cousins all the time. We had the Murphys in the Bronx and the Fletchers, out in Suffolk County, and it was just normal. Only later did I look back and I laughed with my sister. My father passed away a few years ago. Just all the Irish songs we had in our head and our kids had in our head. I said, "How do you know all those rebel songs?" And my kids will say, "You're kidding," with grandma and grandpa. Like, yeah. So only later from a distance did I realize just how tied we were to Ireland and how we, always had a family member flying over as a kid and as a teenager. Always had aunts and uncles and cousins coming to JFK. You go get them. They stay with you for weeks. We had soccer teams coming over because I was playing soccer in Long Island tournaments, and Irish teams would come over and we would billet them. we'd put them up.
Right.
And one of those soccer players married my sister. They're still married. So like just all entwined. Only later do you realize just how ethnically, close we were. But that was just part of our identity that we didn't question. It was normal. Only later do you look back. Now that this generation is just not as tied to it, do I look back and think, wow, they're not as close to the old country as I am.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's different because you don't have, well, I mean, it's with the internet and with all the rest of it, people forget about, like sitting and run. I mean, there's many nights where you would have, can remember where the TV never went on, but you'd sit and tell stories, and there might be some drinks, but the chances are there'll be a lot of songs now. So growing up with that, do you have a favorite Irish band?
Oh, I don't. I mean, there's popular bands and then there's other bands. I like the traditional music. Uh, I have grown to love it. It's funny. I probably rebelled against it younger. Like, and my sister and I would sit in the back of the car. We go, oh my God, more Irish music. And now I put it on and I love it. Luckily my wife, who's not Irish, loves the traditional music, and we can live it, listen to the bands. And, my father loved all fiddle music, right? So we can listen to all the fiddle music. And I still like, now with Spotify, I'll find different versions of Stack of Rye and I'll just play it and I'll just start tapping my foot. And it just feels like it's in my bones. And when I go back to Ballahadreen, and they still, that used to be the town with like, I don't know how many pubs, but they had as many pubs as people. It was one of those towns, and there's still a number of them. And I'm always telling my cousins, I was like, can you take me where they're playing the traditional music? And I want to hear it. And so, yeah, I don't know, just any number of them. And of course, U2, and the Cranberries through the years, Sinead O'Connor, I came of age in the 80s when that was kind of that cultural Irish surge and pride and all of that.
Now, do you have a favorite Irish song?
I like the Fields of Athenry. I'll play that. My father probably played that a lot. I played it at his funeral, so it makes me cry now, so I can't play it as often as I did. But I like that. My father played the rebel songs. He really did. So I heard that. And, there was staunch Republicans. That's why the other hot side of my family came over. They were on the run. So staunch Republicans, great uncles. I had several great uncles on the run that had to come over to the U.S., had a price on their head. So I liked all those Four Green Fields, a lot of the old ones. But again, I'll listen now more to just Stack of Rye and things that fill my soul.
My father passed away in October, and the same thing. They said, we had, when you talk about favorite songs, Field of Athenry is absolutely one of my favorites. Of course, once it's sung by the Furies. I had occasion while I was at Foley's. I won a bet with Ken Casey, the singer. Well, I told him he's not a singer; he's a screamer from the Dropkick Murphys.
Okay, yeah.
And I told him, I said that he should be banned from ever going to Ireland for what he did to the green fields of France. I said, like certain things, like the only person that should ever sing My Way is Frank Sinatra, and the only people that should ever sing the green fields of France are the Fury Brothers. So so now here's the thing. So Brian Kenny, obviously, to a lot of the people here, you've become, I like what someone said, you've become the face of baseball, sabermetrics and all that stuff. And, we're not going to go into war or whack or any of that other stuff. We do sports we're going to discuss here are the ones that I got your paper out of here. But I'm looking down the list of what you're doing. And as you said, now you're in Cooperstown.
Yep.
And
I'm at the Hall of Fame right now. We've been doing our shows all week at the Hall of Fame.
So if you get a chance, people ask me a lot, what's with the Irish Baseball Hall of Fame and how did it come about? And the dream or the idea started not feet from where you are. When I would go up, when Jeff Idelson was the president, I would go up right before Thanksgiving, right after the World Series was over, when anything that pertaining to the World Series would be in. I would go up on a Sunday when there would be nobody there. But when I started to walk through what I consider the Cathedral of Baseball, which is the room with the plaques, the Great Hall, and you look at all the Irish names, and you look at the connection that the Irish do, the Duffys and the Kellys and the Pud Galvins and even the John McGraws and stuff like that, and you realize the connection that what the Irish had done for baseball, and that's why we started the hall, is to honor the contribution of people like yourself who have obviously, we know that we don't have to dig too far on your Irish roots and your connection to baseball, and obviously the third one is for all intents and purposes you're a very good guy, and that's the third one. So we appreciate that. Now I do want to Rick Vaughan, your good friend and also my good friend down here. He said to say hello, but now he said that there's a very cool story about how you met your wife.
Is there? I mean, it's a fairly normal story, I think. What I don't know. What do you know that I don't know?
He said it was well, actually, as his wife said, it was one of the most beautiful stories I heard. Did you guys know each other a long time or something, or there was?
No, I worked with her brother. Her brother was a cameraman with me in local TV, upstate New York. And he had mentioned one time, you go out with I'm the sports director, sportscaster. I'm going out with the cameraman, driving around, doing high school sports, doing Marist basketball, West Point football, and things like that. And we're in the car a lot. And, obviously I'm talking about, I've got to get my resume taped together. I've got to get somewhere. I want to move in this business. It was my second job. I'd been there a few years. And he mentioned
this is Kingston?
Kingston, New York, WTZA. Yeah. It's a fun station. Love being there, but I didn't think I'd be there, 5-6 years. I've been there 5 years. And he mentioned that his sister was an anchor woman. I was like, your sister's an anchor woman? I was like, yeah, she's, worked in, was an anchor woman in New Haven and Tulsa and worked for NBC News. And I was like, I was like, do you think she could help me with my tape? Do you think she could help me out? And I really had no designs on his sister. Wasn't thinking that at all. I was just, can someone who's been in the business tell me about something I should be doing here? And then that's how we met. Went over the house one time, and he brought me over, and we started talking. Went over my tape, and we hit it off very quickly. Fell in love, and were married within a year. I don't know what other story we have. I don't think we have another story.
It must be the other Brian Kenny he was talking about.
It's a fun story. Maybe my wife told it better.
And then basically, was it from Kingston to Sports Center?
It was actually, and then my wife was instrumental, because then I started once she started helping me, it's like, dress a little better, get a haircut. Like, look, this is what you need on your tape. And I started getting offers. I'm like, hey, I could go to this town. And she's like, you're not going to any of these places. She goes, you're going straight to ESPN, which was preposterous at the time. I'm in Kingston, New York. I said, how am I going to ESPN? And she said, no, you're obviously good enough. You're going to go straight to ESPN. And it took a few years, but I went straight to ESPN, as she said, and then spent 14 years at ESPN as a result. And that was, obviously a terrific launch.
Yeah, because you went from Sports Center to Baseball Tonight, and then basically to the network. Did
everything.
The other thing is, obviously, that some people may not realize is that boxing is also something that features prominently in your. But before we get off baseball, growing up, favorite team?
I was a Yankee fan.
On Long Island, that was pretty ballsy.
Yeah, I probably went to more Mets games being out on Long Island. It was easier to get to. My father's precinct. My father was NYPD. He was detective in the 108. And it was easier to get to Shea Stadium. I probably went to more games there. I fell in love with the Yankees, the Yankee yearbook, Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, the history, the permanence of it, going to Yankee Stadium. And this was the old Yankee Stadium, I remember. Not just the old one, the old one, the original one. I was there. I was a young kid, but I was there, and falling in love with the whole historical nature of it and the sense of permanence and greatness. So I fell in love with that, while also going to see Tom Seaver pitch, and so I recognized that the Mets were there, but I was a Yankee fan. Truth be told, I was a Yankee fan.
Well, I have a similar story, and I grew up 3,500 miles from here. Of the same thing I grew up with. My parents were back after they got married. They went back, and I'd call them cousins, but they weren't cousins. And while they were teaching me about the Yankees and Motley Crue, and I was teaching them about English soccer and U2. And for me, it was the same thing. It was like, you know, the history of the Yankees is basically the history of baseball. But I mean, I will never forget the first place I ever went when I came here in 1991 was Yankee Stadium. And till the day it closed, every time that I would walk out, I know I was sat in the upper deck, but every time I walk out and you see that field and know that, you know, that's the same field that Root, Maris, DiMaggio, you know, Mickey Mantle, they all played on, you know, was
Yeah.
very, very cool.
You
But
felt it when you were there. I mean,
yeah,
that was the shame of, I know when they, got rid of the stadium, went to the new stadium. I really felt that. I was like, you can never get that back. I felt sad about that. And it's funny now, so I hear too people, not that much younger than I am saying, I remember the old stadium. I'm like, oh, the original, like, they're like, no, where Chris Chambliss and Thurman Munson. I'm like, no, that's not the old stadium.
yeah,
The old stadium is the old stadium.
yeah, with the pillars and
Yeah.
so now you've made cameos in a couple of boxing movies. So I mean, those residual checks, they must be pretty big coming in.
They keep coming. I get, like Rocky Balboa must have a surge now and then. So yeah, that was nice. I did Rocky Balboa and met and was on set with Sly Stallone, and it was a thrill. He's a great dude. But he's directing and starring in the film. But I can still remember going up to him, like there was just certain nuances of how a fighter made his entrance and what the fans would be saying and what my role was. And we were at a fight in Vegas. There was a crowd, and they gave Sly, like, I don't know, 15 minutes to say, hey, you can use the crowd, you can shoot, but then you got to be done, because then I think it was a Bernard Hopkins fight coming on next, and we're ready for a fight. But they gave him 15 minutes to shoot, and I just made a suggestion or two on how to best utilize that time. And I said, I hope you don't, I don't want to be presumptuous here, Sly, but this is how it's done, how you'd make your entrance, and this is how you could probably do it, look good on the film, I think. And he said, "No, I have you here because I know you know what you're doing. You're helpful." And he actually did it. So I don't know, that was a ton of fun to meet a legend like that. And I look back once in a while and I watch Rocky Balboa, and I'm like, oh, there I am, Burt Sugar, I'm there. It's a lot of fun.
Um, people don't realize that first Rocky movie. I mean, that whole story about how he wrote it, but he was the only one that was going to make it, and selling his dog and having to buy his dog back. But now you mentioned Burt Sugar. You know the Burt Sugar connection with the old Yankee Stadium that we're talking about?
Yes, yeah. Burt told me many a time. The original memorabilia collector.
I believe four dumpsters or four
Really?
containers of basically the Yankees were dumping it, and Burt went in with four containers and took out all the seats and everything that they could get their hands on.
Amazing.
And of course, the greatest mystery in the history of sports is where did the safe go to? Did you ever hear the story about that?
No.
There was a huge safe in the old Yankee Stadium, and sometime during the renovations, it disappeared, and no one ever knew where the safe went. And I mean,
really?
This is not something that you and I could pick up and put in the back of a pickup.
Yeah.
So, do you have a favorite boxer?
Lots of them. Probably the guys I got to meet when I did Friday Night Fights on ESPN. There was a time after Max Kellerman left. He left to go to Fox, I think, at the time. And we were like, well, what are we going to do with the studio show? And what we did was we brought in a fighter each week. And we had like just about everybody. I mean, we had Smoking Joe Frazier come in, Reuben Hurricane Carter for a day, Floyd Mayweather, Michael Spinks, Bob Foster, legendary fighters. But I did get to work a lot with Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Hagler is one of my favorites. And I was more of a Hagler guy when he was fighting than a Sugar Ray guy. But then I got to work with Sugar Ray Leonard at Fox and at DAZN, and he's a prince of a guy. So now I'm also a Sugar Ray Leonard guy. And so those are my favorite fighters. I think they are better than the fighters today. It just is. The guys with more reps, they're tested more often. I don't think anybody now can compare. Maybe Terrence Crawford, but can compare to those guys back then. So those are my favorite. Smoking Joe, Joe Frazier, Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, the top of the food chain.
Did you ever get to meet Barry McGuigan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what he would be doing when we were calling fights together. We had him in on Friday Night Fights, so we spent a day together, obviously talking the Irish connection. And then I would see him quite often when I was calling fights out on the road, and he'd be calling them frequently. I don't know if it was for Sky Sports or BBC, wherever it was. And so I would see him quite often. Yeah, no, all time great. I was watching those fights, of course, the singing
Well,
and
his father singing Danny Boy beforehand is.
yeah.
I knew his parents well. Actually, I didn't know Barry well, but I knew his parents really well. His father Pat was a wonderful, wonderful man.
Now, what
Yeah,
you say you grew up near the border, so you close to where he lived?
yeah.
He was on the border.
He was from Clones, which would have been about maybe, I don't know, 15 miles away or so. I
Okay.
I grew up in Cavan. He was in Monaghan. So
Okay.
it was
Isn't
yeah,
that funny now? Like again, you were south of the border, the partition. Again, think about it. My grandfather, who I grew up with, like it's not like somebody I know, it's not in a history book. I grew up with my grandfather. He passed away in 1989. Was Catholic, grew up, just happened to be on the other side of the border. So like he was on that side, and yet this huge division. And in the 1980s, when I was going there and I was single, I never went to the north. I was told you do not go to the north. You did not go
yeah,
through a checkpoint.
yeah,
Single guy, America. You think you have rights. You do not have rights.
yeah,
They will wonder what you're up to. You could disappear. Never went there. I only went there as an adult years later. And then Shaun, the first time I couldn't believe it. I drove through and I didn't realize I'd passed the border. So I think
yeah,
that's what people hold
yeah,
so it's so important now not to lose that is that without the checkpoints you just eliminate so much trouble and you don't even know you're in another country because it wasn't another country when my grandfather growing up. There was no Republic of Ireland. There was Ireland.
yeah. But
Born in 1910.
as a kid, you always knew when you're in the north because the roads were better.
Yeah, right.
You could tell.
It still kind of is that way, actually. It's
Well,
not,
you can
things
tell when you
neaten
cross.
up a
You
little
can tell when you cross over the border because oh yeah, yeah, there's not as many potholes now. In fact, I'm
bit.
flying there tomorrow, so I will be in Fermanagh on Sunday.
Will you really?
I certainly will. I will be there on Sunday.
Excellent.
Um, so in finishing up a couple of questions. Actually, it's funny. One of the I have many memories and great memories of Foley's. The One of the last book launches we did was your Ahead of the Curve, which I was very honored that we were able to do for you at Foley's. Um, so now you're the MC at Cooperstown. Um, you've been doing that what 6 years now since 2017 or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, about 5 or 6 years now. Yeah.
So as a baseball fan and going there, I've been lucky enough to have I've been in a couple of situations where you're in a room with 25 Hall of Famers and you don't know which way to look, and have you had that moment where you're 6 years old again when you got to meet some of these guys?
It is it's awesome. And even as I've gotten to know all of them through the years, I can still recall, you're just in the lobby and you're having a conversation with Brooks Robinson. You're talking to Tom Seaver. You're talking to Lou Brock. You see Hank Aaron and his wife as they're coming through. And I've had conversations with normal conversations. Al Kaline comes over and starts talking about he's watched my shows. And I'm thinking, and he leaves, and I'm sitting there, I think, with a couple of writers, and I said, "Did Al Kaline just come up to me to speak to me?" Like I couldn't believe it. So I still pinch myself, and it is the rare air. I love being there and talking to the guys. They're human beings, but to see them all together is still awe-inspiring, and it is a thrill. I mean, I consider that the greatest honor. I used to watch George Grant do it on ESPN, and he did it for the MC of the ceremony itself, and he did a marvelous job. And I'm trying to carry on that tradition where I'm doing the roll call of greatness, and they're coming out behind me, out on the stage. To me, it's a thrill of a lifetime.
Um, Now, I'm not sure if he had passed or not, but did you get someone said there was that nothing summed up Cooperstown better than um, listening to, being sitting on the back deck at the hotel at the Otasaga, and hearing Stan Musial play "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" on his
Yeah,
harmonica.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I was there a number of years with Stan. Came across who is one of my all-time favorites. Stan Musial was probably my favorite old-time ball player. Hank Aaron, obviously way up there as well. And just a thrill to meet him. And again, what a fantastic person. You know, everything said about Stan is true. And he would break out that harmonica sometimes on the veranda, sometimes right here. I'm in the Hall of Fame now, right in the plaque gallery, because they would have a little, cocktail party after the Parade of Legends when they would come in, and he would just be sitting there with his wife, his children, his grandchildren, and he'd break it out. And Stan would be there, and the Yogi Berra would be over here, and yeah, it boggles the mind, the things that I've seen only in, it doesn't seem like it's that long. It's, 20, 25 years of, coming here for more than 30 years, but to be in an official capacity in that time. And already, like, I think back to the things I've been able to see, and meet the all-time greats and see them and see, it's difficult, Shaun, again, to be them. I try to remember that the amount of energy, in my role as a celebrity, I get so many people that will come up and want to say hello. And sometimes you can feel like, wow, I really need a break. So I can't imagine what Stan Musial had to go through, or Cal Ripken had to go through, or Joe Frazier had to go through. I can't imagine. It's a responsibility that some are better at than others in carrying. And some of the guys that we mentioned, Stan Musial, Brooks Robinson, Harmon Killebrew, never had a false moment, like never had a bad beat. And that's difficult to give everybody that energy and the time. And, this person came over to speak to me. Let me autograph something for them. It's endless, kind of, and it's difficult. And so many of these men handle it so well. It's admirable.
Yeah, without a doubt. And having said that, of the four that are going in this year, one, John and I are taking all the credit for, and that would be Jim Leland, because we inducted Jim last year into the Irish Hall of Fame.
Nice, paving the way.
Oh, I told him, I said, Jimmy, I said, we're paving the way for you. If I don't get mentioned twice in the speech, and we're going to be very upset. The man couldn't have been nicer. I mean, I got a chance. We did a little Q&A with a couple of our members beforehand, and then we went on the field. I made the presentation, and then we sat and we watched, I think, the first 6 or 7 innings of the game. And I mean, in the course of that, let's say 3 hours, he must have been approached at least 50, 60 times. And he stood up for every picture, and he signed every baseball. And I was just in awe. And I just said to him, I turned to the wife first. I said, is this all the time? She's like, Shaun, this is all the time. And, and I said to him, I said, Jimmy, I said, does it not get old? And he says, listen, he said, I used to tell my players all the time, he's like, the time you need to worry, he said, is the time when they don't.
Right. Right. It's hard to keep that perspective, right? That's what I'm saying. It's you see, like, people are so nice when they come up, but I've been with, like, some of the all-time greats, and you can hear, well, a lot of it is the same story. It's like, I watched you with my dad, and we all have those stories, and it's the same stories, and you think it would be easy to get cynical and just physically tired dealing with it, and to not allow that to happen. That takes discipline, that takes pride, and again, the guys at the very top, there's a number of them that handle it so well.
And then you have George Brett, who just doesn't sign anything, which is, hey, it's his prerogative.
Does he not? George is a good dude, though. George
he's a great dude, but I had so very quickly, because we're running out of time here. I had like 4 or 5 occasions where I'd run into George, and I had Foley's at the time, and I was working on my 4,000 signed baseballs, and every time I'd ask him, he'd say no. And then the Royals play the Mets in the World Series. And my good friend Gene Watson, who was a special assistant to the general manager out there at the time, he says to me, he says, Shaun, do you mind if the Royals make Foley's their home after the games, and for guys to come in, and they, because the whole front office is there, so I'm standing in Foley's talking to Bob Nightingale, and then comes George Brett, and I said hello to him, and we got them sat at the table, and then I went back to talk to Nightingale, and a little while later, Gene says, "Are you going to come and talk to George?" And I went down, and he's looking around. He says, "This is pretty impressive." I said, "Thank you very much." He said, "Well," and then Gene says, "Do you know where George's ball is?" I said, "Of course I know where George's ball is." And George's like, 4,000 baseballs, and you know where my ball is?" And I says, "Yeah, you haven't fucking signed one." I said, I've asked you 5 times, and you said no. And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Oh, World Series, All-Star game, alumni dinner. I said, I must have caught you on 5 times, but he laughed, and it was, but we
He did
don't.
sign a ball then, right?
He did
At
sign the
that,
ball
yes,
then,
okay,
and
yeah,
then we
good.
became the best of buddies.
Yeah, no,
So
he's a very good guy. Right,
oh,
right.
without a doubt,
These guys get that. There was that memorabilia industry that popped up on having these guys sign.
oh yeah.
It's endless. I understand them getting cynical about it. It's
Oh, well,
endless.
and the amount of money getting, but very quickly, it's funny you said that about this listening to the same stories over and over again. Um, I happened to be having dinner with a friend of mine. This is maybe 15 years ago, and Lawrence Taylor joined us at the table. We're sitting, we're chatting, and while we're chatting, at least 10 different people came over to the table, and Lawrence would say, the guy, he's like, listen, he says, you want me to sign something? He says, you want me to sign something? You want to take a picture? He says, I don't need the story. You know, and that's and that's, be honest with you, we did used to do a lot. We did a lot of charity events at Foley's, and I would, I would always tell them. We did one for Shannon Ford, that PR for the Mets when she was
Yeah.
she was fighting cancer, and we had all these Mets. We had Alfonso, and we had John Franco, and the whole lot. And so there, I have them all in the basement. We have Gary Cohn, Keith was there, Ron Darling was there. There's a slew of them, and so I'm upstairs, and they can hear me upstairs. So I'm explaining what's going to happen. I said, "Look, the guys are going to come up. They're going to sit at the tables." I said, "There's a lot of people here. We've got to get this done." And I said, "Look, do me a favor." I said, get your picture taken, get your autograph, you said, but keep moving, because I said, I guarantee you right now that John Franco does not remember meeting you in the lobby of the Ramada Hotel in 1995. So I go downstairs, and Algardo Alfonso's got this white sweater on, and he's doing, and I says, is everything all right? And he's like, tell him. So he said, Franco heard what I when they heard what I said. Franco spat guacamole across the table all over his sweatshirt. So I know what you mean about saying that. So Brian, listen, I really, really, really appreciate you doing this for us. We're very honored that you're one of our nominees for this year. We look forward to chatting more down the line about this.